The Galactic Academy was a place where young cadets from many worlds gathered to learn the history of war, the strategies of fleets, and the secrets of survival. The hall was vast and filled with the soft glow of lights. Rows of alien students sat quietly, their eyes sharp and curious, each of them trained since childhood to respect power, to admire strength, and to fear weakness. On this day the lesson promised to be different. Because the subject was not about machines or fleets or weapons. It was about a species that lived far away yet haunted every whisper of military history. The teacher entered the room slowly, his robes trailing behind him, his face calm but his eyes heavy. When he spoke his voice carried across the hall. Today we will speak of humanity. The name alone stirred unease. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, some muttered to themselves, some lowered their eyes, others leaned forward with both fear and curiosity. Humans were small compared to many species, fragile bones compared to scaled giants, soft skin compared to armored hides, lungs that struggled on thin worlds, hearts that should have failed under pressure. Yet they were not remembered for weakness, they were remembered for something else, something that no one could explain. Fully, the teacher raised his long fingers and tapped a control on the podium. The lights dimmed and the wall behind him came alive with ancient recordings, ships burning, worlds shaking, soldiers screaming, fleets tearing each other apart in fire. The students gasped, for the records were not simulations, they were real. The teacher's voice remained steady. Many species have armies that are larger, stronger, or more advanced. Yet there is only one that the galaxy calls the most dangerous: humanity. The cadets stared as the recordings continued, fleets of hundreds of ships firing together against only a handful. Yet somehow the smaller human fleet cut through them like a blade through silk. Explosions ripped across the void, and still the humans advanced. One alien cadet whispered under his breath, "It is impossible." The others around him nodded nervously. Because the numbers made no sense, the victories should not have been possible. Yet the records did not lie. The teacher turned to face them, his eyes scanning the hall. You will hear many rumors about humanity. Some say they are reckless, some say they are cursed, some say they are touched by death itself. But all of you must understand the truth. They are feared not because of what they are, but because of what they refuse to be. They refuse to break. The recordings shifted, now showing human soldiers on the ground, small compared to the massive alien warriors they fought against. Their weapons simple, their bodies bleeding, yet they moved forward without hesitation. One human carried another across fire, dragging him while returning fire with his free hand. Another crawled across the dirt with a shattered leg, throwing grenades until his enemies fell. The cadets shifted in their seats, their throats dry, their eyes fixed. The teacher let the silence linger before speaking again. Other species fight for glory, for empire, for wealth. Humans fight for survival, and survival has no end. The words sank deep into the students, because they understood survival was not a goal. It was an instinct, something that did not stop even when hope was gone. One cadet raised his hand, his voice trembling, "Professor, is it true that entire fleets have been lost to small groups of humans?" The teacher nodded once, slowly, "Yes. Fleets larger than you can imagine, armies stronger than you believe. They were all undone by soldiers who should have fallen but did not." Gasps filled the hall. Some cadets scribbled notes with shaking fingers, others could not move at all, frozen by the images on the wall. One whispered to his friend, "How can something so fragile be so deadly?" The friend shook his head, whispering back, "Because they do not stop, even when they should." The teacher heard them and did not correct them. Because the words were true, humans did not stop, not when poisoned, not when burned, not when crushed. They endured, and it was endurance that turned them into legends. The recordings shifted again, this time showing aftermaths. Burned cities where human survivors still stood, wounded, scarred, but alive, small groups raising their flag over ruins, their eyes hollow but their hands steady. The cadets leaned forward as the teacher said softly, "Do you understand now? They are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the largest, but they are the most feared, because when war should have ended them, they refused to end, and when fleets believed victory was certain, humans turned it into ashes." One cadet covered her face, whispering, "They should not exist, no one can live like that." But another replied quietly, "Yet they do, and that is why the galaxy fears them." The teacher nodded slowly, letting the words rest heavy in the hall. Fear them, respect them, study them, but never underestimate them. For humanity carries a truth that no other species dares to hold. the truth that survival itself is the sharpest weapon. The lights dimmed back to normal, the recordings fading, but the silence remained. The cadets looked at each other with wide eyes, whispers slipping between them like shadows. The hook had taken hold. They had seen fleets fall. They had seen fragile bodies become unbreakable weapons, and in their hearts one thought repeated again and again: humans should not be dangerous, but they are, and the galaxy would never forget it. The next day the cadets returned to the lecture hall with restless eyes and silent mouths. They had barely slept, their dreams filled with images of burning fleets and human soldiers who refused to fall. The whispers from yesterday had spread to every corner of the academy. Even the youngest recruits who had never seen a battlefield now muttered the same words. Humans should not be dangerous, but they are. The teacher stood at the front, his expression unreadable, his long hands folded behind his back. When the room finally fell quiet, he spoke in a low voice. Yesterday you saw their victories. Today you will learn why those victories are possible. The wall behind him lit up again, showing side-by-side comparisons of species. Towering reptilian warriors with scaled hides thicker than armor. Insectoid fighters whose claws could shear steel. Avian soldiers who could fly above the battlefield raining destruction. And then the human, smaller, softer, skin that tore easily, bones that snapped under pressure, organs that could be pierced by weapons others shrugged off. The cadets stared in disbelief. Some even laughed nervously. One muttered, "Fragile." Another whispered, "Weak." The teacher silenced them with a single look. Fragile, yes. Weak, no. Look deeper. The images shifted, showing medical scans, human hearts beating faster than most species under stress, lungs expanding and contracting in thin air where others suffocated, muscles burning with chemicals that let them keep moving when they should collapse, brains glowing with activity far beyond what was expected in the midst of chaos. The teacher's voice grew sharper. Do not judge only by what you see. Strength is not only flesh, it is endurance. It is will. And no species has more of it than humanity. One cadet raised his hand hesitantly. Professor, how can endurance be greater than strength? If their bones break, if their bodies bleed, how does it matter? The teacher turned to him slowly. Because when their bones break, they keep moving. When their bodies bleed, they keep fighting. He tapped the console and a recording played. A human soldier with a broken arm holding his weapon with the other, still advancing while screaming orders to his squad. Another clip showed a soldier dragging himself forward with shattered legs, firing from the ground until his last breath. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, their throats dry. The teacher continued, other species retreat when injured, humans do not. Other species surrender when outnumbered, humans fight harder. They are built by their world. A place so violent that even surviving the day is war. He pressed another button and the wall filled with images of Earth. Hurricanes tearing cities apart. Lightning storms striking forests, predators with teeth longer than arms, diseases that burned through populations. The cadets stared with wide eyes, some whispering in horror. How can life exist there? The teacher answered simply. It exists because it fights, and that fight never leaves them. The comparison shifted again, showing alien armies, their soldiers trained for years with perfect discipline. Yet their lives rarely touched by true danger. Their world safe, their skies calm. Their predators long extinct, then humans, who from birth faced sickness, storms, predators, hunger, fear. One cadet whispered to his neighbor. They are trained by their world before they ever hold a weapon. The neighbor nodded shakily. No wonder they do not stop. The teacher paced slowly, his voice lowering to a near whisper. Many of you believe technology makes you strong, armor, fleets, weapons. But what happens when those fail? When the armor cracks? When the fleets burn? When the weapons run empty, most species fall. But humans fight with stones, with sticks, with their bare hands if they must. He gestured at the human image on the screen, and that is why they are feared. Because no matter what you strip from them, you cannot strip away their will to survive. The hall was silent, the cadets' faces pale, their pens unmoving, their notes forgotten. The lesson pressed deeper than numbers or data. It was truth they could feel in their bones. The teacher looked at them carefully, his voice sharp. You will one day serve in fleets and armies, and you may face humans. If you look at them and see weakness, you will already be dead. One cadet, younger than most, whispered into the silence. But Professor, what do they fight for? What do they want? The teacher paused, his eyes dark. They fight to survive, and survival has no limit. He let the words hang heavy. the students shifting nervously in their seats. When the lights finally dimmed and the lesson ended, the cadets did not rush out as usual. They sat frozen, staring at the human image still faintly glowing on the wall. One muttered to himself, "They are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the largest, but they are something else." Another whispered, "They are what happens when the universe itself trains you to endure." The whispers followed them out into the corridors, heavier than before, because now they understood the strange comparison. Fragility was not weakness, not for humans. Fragility was the mask hiding the most terrifying truth of all, that nothing could make them stop. The lecture hall was more crowded than ever. Cadets from other divisions slipped quietly into the back rows, drawn by the rumors that had spread since the last 2 lessons. The whispers of impossible survival and the strange comparisons that made no sense yet explained everything. The air was heavy with unease. Every student waiting for the next revelation. The teacher stood at the podium, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Today you will learn the first secret of humanity. The one that changes battlefields and makes them the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy." The room fell silent, every word sinking like stone into water. The wall behind him glowed to life again, displaying old combat recordings, the kind sealed in archives that cadets rarely saw. They showed humans on battlefields far from their world, surrounded by enemies, outnumbered, wounded, yet still moving forward. One soldier dragged himself through the mud with one arm while holding a weapon in the other. Another fought with blood streaming down his face, his armor shattered but his voice still carrying commands. The cadets shifted uneasily, their own instincts screamed that such wounds should mean defeat. But the humans refused. The teacher spoke softly. "This is their secret. They fight even when they should not. They fight when their bodies are broken. They fight when their chances are gone." Gasps filled the room as the recordings grew worse. Images of soldiers limping on shattered legs, bleeding soldiers laughing as they charged, even groups of them fighting with nothing but knives and bare hands after their weapons failed. The students whispered nervously. One muttered, "That is not courage. That is madness." Another whispered back, "No, that is something else." The teacher nodded. "It is not madness, it is endurance. It is the will to survive carried into battle. And it makes them something no strategy can prepare you for." The screen changed again, now showing statistics, charts comparing different species. Alien soldiers had limits. Once wounded they fell. Once surrounded they surrendered. Once hope was gone they broke. But the human line on the chart did not fall. It kept rising. The more they bled, the more they were cornered, the harder they fought. The cadets stared at the impossible line, unable to speak. The teacher's voice was low. "Most armies fight for victory. Humans fight because they refuse to stop. Victory is only a result, not their purpose. Their purpose is survival." One cadet raised his hand with trembling fingers. "Professor, why would anyone fight when there is no hope?" The teacher looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because for them hope is not required, only breath. If they are alive, they fight." The words sent shivers across the hall. The cadets lowered their eyes. Because they knew in their own species defeat came long before death. Yet humans treated defeat as nothing but another obstacle to push through. The recording shifted again, showing a famous battle. A small human squad trapped in ruins against overwhelming alien forces. They should have been annihilated in minutes. Yet hours later they were still fighting, using the ruins as cover, ambushing from shadows, turning every corner into a trap. The teacher explained, "They adapt, they improvise, and they never stop." By the time reinforcements arrived, the squad was still alive, scarred, broken, but alive. The alien cadets stared in disbelief. Their voices low, one whispered, "They should have died." Another whispered, "Maybe they don't know how to." The teacher let the silence drag before he spoke again. "This is the first secret. They do not surrender. They do not accept defeat. They fight beyond reason, beyond pain, beyond the limits that hold the rest of us. And this is why fleets fall. Because when you think the battle is over, for them it is only beginning." The room was heavy with fear. The cadets sat frozen, their pens untouched, their notes forgotten. No one dared to move. One young cadet finally whispered, "If they fight like this, how can anyone ever defeat them?" The teacher's gaze swept across the hall, his voice colder now. "Many have asked that question, and none have found the answer." When the lesson ended, the cadets walked out in silence, their minds filled with images of broken soldiers who kept moving, of survivors who turned hopeless battles into legends. In the corridors they whispered to each other. But their whispers carried no comfort, only dread. One said, "Their secret is not strength, it is refusal." Another replied, "They refuse even death," and the words hung in the air like a curse. By the time they reached their dormitories, the truth had settled in their bones. Humanity's first secret was not weapons or power, it was the terrifying truth that they would never stop, no matter the cost, and that truth alone was enough to shake the galaxy. The hall was tense before the lesson even began. The cadets gathered quietly, their faces pale, their eyes restless. The first secret of humanity still weighed heavy on their minds. The secret that humans did not stop, that they fought beyond defeat, beyond reason, beyond the limit of survival. Many of them had not slept, their dreams filled with images of scarred soldiers refusing to fall. Now the teacher stood again at the front, his hands folded behind his back, his voice steady but low. "Yesterday you learned the first secret. Today you will learn the weapon that makes them unstoppable. Not a blade, not a gun, not a fleet, but something far worse, their weapon is pain." The cadets shifted uncomfortably, their bodies instinctively rejecting the thought. Pain had always been a warning, pain meant stop, pain meant the end was near. But the teacher tapped the console and the screen came alive, showing recordings of human soldiers in battle. Wounds deep and bloody, bones broken, fire scorching their bodies. Yet they continued to move, to fight, to lead. One soldier with half his face burned still raised his weapon, still shouted orders. Another, with an arrow through his side, carried a comrade on his back, firing with his free hand. The cadets gasped. Some turned away, unable to watch. The teacher's voice cut through the noise. For most species, pain ends the fight. For humans, pain begins it. You will see in these records how they turn suffering into strength, how wounds become fuel, how agony becomes fire that drives them forward. The images shifted again, showing a soldier in a trench, blood soaking his chest. He screamed, but it was not the scream of surrender, it was the scream of rage, and he surged out of the trench with his weapon, cutting down enemies before collapsing. The cadets stared in shock, whispers filling the room. One muttered, "That is not possible." Another whispered, "That is not fighting, that is madness." The teacher nodded slowly. Madness, that is what many called it. But what if I told you this madness wins wars? The screen showed a famous campaign, a human unit surrounded, their supplies cut off, their wounds untreated. For any other army it would have been the end. But the humans fought on for days. Every scream of pain turned into another push, every wound another reason to strike harder. When reinforcements finally reached them, they were still standing, covered in scars, but standing. The cadets felt their hearts pound, because this was not strategy or technology. This was raw, terrifying endurance born from suffering. One cadet raised his hand, his voice shaky. "Professor, how can they endure such pain? How can they continue when their bodies are breaking?" The teacher turned to him. "Because to them pain is not defeat. It is proof they are still alive. As long as they feel pain, they know they can still fight." The room fell into silence at his words, the cadets shifting in their seats, their minds unable to accept but unable to deny what they had seen. The images shifted once more, showing scars, bodies marked with lines of battles past. Every scar a memory of pain survived. The teacher gestured toward the screen. "These are not weaknesses, these are medals. Every scar is proof of survival. Every scar is a weapon. For when their enemies see them, they see a soldier who has endured the impossible and will endure it again." The cadets shivered, because they had never thought of pain as anything but failure, yet humans wore it as armor. The teacher's voice grew colder. "Do you see now why fleets fear them? Why armies break against them? You cannot scare a species that uses fear itself as fuel. You cannot stop soldiers who treat pain as a tool. When you wound them, you do not end them. You only make them stronger." The silence that followed was crushing. The cadets looked at each other with wide eyes. One whispered, "Then what chance do we have?" Another whispered back, "None." The lesson ended, but the fear lingered. The cadets filed out slowly, their minds full of scars and screams. In the corridors the whispers returned. Some muttered that humans were cursed. Others swore they were not soldiers at all but demons of war. One cadet wrote in his notebook, "Pain is their strength. Wounds are their weapons. I do not understand how to fight something like that." And when night fell over the academy, many lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the lesson again and again, realizing that the weapon of pain was not something that could be stolen or copied. It was something born only of humanity. And so the truth spread through the academy like a shadow, the second lesson carving itself into their hearts. Humans were not terrifying because they avoided pain. They were terrifying because they embraced it, turned it into power, and carried it into every battlefield, every scar a reminder, every scream a weapon, every breath proof that survival itself was the sharpest blade. The cadets understood then why the galaxy whispered of them, why the name of humanity carried dread. Because no fleet, no army, no empire could defeat a species that fought with pain itself as their weapon. The academy was no longer the same after the last lesson. The cadets moved through the halls with quiet steps, their whispers soft, their eyes full of unease. The talk of humans had spread like a shadow through every division. Even those who studied navigation or engineering now spoke of scars and pain, of soldiers who turned wounds into weapons. The rumor had reached the instructors too, and many avoided saying the word human aloud, but there was no escaping it. The fear had rooted itself deep. When the cadets gathered again, the teacher's face was grave, his voice lower than usual. Today you will see what the council tried to bury, records that were locked away, because the truth was too dangerous. These are the forgotten wars of humanity. The screen behind him flickered to life, showing ancient footage, grainy, but real, alien fleets advancing across the void, their numbers vast, their confidence clear, planets falling one after another under banners of conquest. The cadets leaned forward nervously. They had seen wars before, but none like this. Then the image shifted, showing Earth, a blue and green world under siege, the sky torn by fire, cities burning, oceans boiling under bombardment. Yet, in the chaos, small groups of human soldiers fought back, ragged and desperate, but alive. The cadets gasped, because the battles should have been over in days. Yet the records showed they stretched into years. The teacher explained in a grim tone, these invaders were stronger, faster, and believed victory was certain. But they did not understand humanity. They did not understand that survival itself was a weapon. The screen showed recordings of ambushes, humans striking from ruins at night, turning forests into traps, deserts into weapons, mountains into fortresses. The invaders lost ships, lost armies, lost hope, until entire fleets withdrew in shame. One cadet whispered, how could they win against such numbers? Another answered in a trembling voice, they didn't win, they refused to lose. The footage shifted again, showing another forgotten war, an alien empire pushing into human colonies, their war machines towering over the battlefield, their soldiers armored like walking tanks. The cadets gasped as the recordings showed human soldiers charging with nothing but explosives strapped to their bodies, throwing themselves beneath the enemy machines to tear them apart. Others fought with sticks and blades after their ammunition was gone. The teacher's voice was heavy. These wars were not victories of power, they were victories of will. Humanity would rather die than surrender, and in refusing, they forced their enemies to retreat. The cadets sat frozen, their pens still, their hearts pounding. The images would not leave them. Burning cities where humans still raised flags, shattered armies that still advanced. One cadet whispered, they are not soldiers. They are survivors who make war their home. The teacher nodded, yes, and that is why these wars are not taught. Because they do not fit into the lessons of strategy. They are not about tactics or weapons. They are about refusal, the refusal to die, the refusal to bow, the refusal to end. The next recording showed a battlefield littered with bodies, both human and alien, smoke rising into a broken sky. Yet among the corpses a single human staggered to his feet. His arm hanging useless, his body drenched in blood. He picked up a fallen weapon and screamed as he charged into the enemy line alone. The cadets recoiled in shock, some covering their faces. The teacher's voice was soft. This one soldier delayed an entire column long enough for civilians to escape. His name is lost. But his story is not, and there are thousands like it. The room was silent now, not a whisper, not a breath. The cadets looked at each other with pale faces, their bodies trembling. They had trained their whole lives to believe that wars were won by numbers, by technology, by strategy. But the forgotten wars showed them a truth they could not escape. Humans did not win because of what they had. They won because of what they were, and that truth was more frightening than any weapon. The teacher let the silence stretch before speaking again. You ask why these wars were buried. Because if the galaxy remembered them, fear would spread faster than light. The council believed that forgetting would bring peace. But forgetting only left us unprepared. And now you know. You cannot unlearn what you have seen. He looked across the hall, his gaze heavy. Never believe that a human fight ends when you think it should. Never believe a battle is won until they are truly gone. for if even one remains, the war continues. The lesson ended, but no one moved. The cadets sat as if chained to their seats, their eyes haunted by the images on the screen. When they finally rose, their voices were no louder than breaths. One whispered, "The forgotten wars should have destroyed them." Another whispered back, "Maybe they destroyed us instead." As they filed into the corridors, the weight of the lesson followed them, pressing down on every step. The forgotten wars were no longer forgotten, and the truth they carried was chilling. Humanity had survived what should have ended them, and in surviving, they had become something the galaxy would always fear. That night the cadets could not escape the memories, the screams, the scars, the endless refusal to die. Many sat in silence staring at the stars, whispering questions that had no answers. How do you fight a species that never stops? How do you defeat soldiers who turn every loss into strength? No one spoke the answer, because deep down they already knew. You don't, you endure, or you fall, and the galaxy had already fallen once before. In wars it chose to forget. The council chamber was vast, its high ceilings filled with echoes of voices that rarely agreed. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in curved rows, their robes glimmering in the pale light. The air was thick with unease, for the whispers of humanity's forgotten wars had reached even here. The Academy reports had spread like wildfire, and now fear hung over the chamber heavier than any law. The head counselor rose slowly, his voice heavy. "We must speak of the humans." At once the chamber stirred, voices overlapping, some sharp with anger, others trembling with worry. One counselor slammed his hand against the desk. "This is madness. We should never have allowed them into our academies. Their presence corrupts our young." Another shouted back, "No, it is not corruption. It is revelation. Our cadets are finally seeing the truth. Better to know than to be blind." The chamber erupted in noise until the elder counselor raised a hand. His voice low but firm, "Silence." When quiet finally fell, the elder leaned forward, his eyes cold. "I have lived through 5 wars. I have seen empires rise and collapse. But never have I seen a species like this. Humanity should not exist. And yet they do. They should have fallen in the forgotten wars. And yet they survived. Tell me, how do you face such a people?" The chamber shifted uneasily. No one spoke, because no one had an answer. Another counselor, her feathers trembling with her knees, finally stood. "We cannot allow them to grow unchecked. If they ever turn their fury upon us, nothing will hold them back. We must contain them, control them, before it is too late." Her words struck fear into many, but a different voice rose in defiance, tall and cloaked in silver, his tone cutting through the chamber. "And what if you try to control them and fail? What then? What happens when they see the leash? Will they not break it? Will they not come for us with the same rage that destroyed their enemies before?" The words silenced the hall, because the thought was already in every mind. To provoke humanity was to invite disaster. To ignore them was to invite terror. Another counselor spoke carefully. "Perhaps alliance is the answer. Bring them close, not as subjects, but as partners." But even as he said it, his voice trembled, because deep down he feared that partnership with humans meant standing beside a storm that never ended. The reports from the Academy were passed around, datapads filled with lines of observation. One recorded the human's calm face as he described thousands dying to test medicines. Another described scars worn like medals. Another described the silence of the students after witnessing survival that defied reason. The counselors read them in silence, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Finally one muttered, "If this is what one of them does in a classroom, what will an army of them do on a battlefield?" The elder counselor's voice was low. "This is the question none of you want to face. Fleets, armies, empires, none of it matters if they rise." The chamber was still, the words pressing into every mind like a blade. Finally a younger counselor burst out. "Then why not strike now, while they are few, before they spread further?" But his voice faltered as he spoke, because even he knew the truth. Strike first and humanity would never forgive. They would fight until the stars themselves went dark. The debate raged for hours, voices clashing, threats and warnings thrown across the chamber. But every argument circled back to the same point. Humanity could not be controlled, could not be contained, could not be ignored. One counselor whispered, "They are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the largest. Yet they are the most feared, because they do not stop, because they make pain a weapon, because they turn survival into war." As the session dragged on, silence finally took hold again, heavy and suffocating. The elder spoke once more, his words slow, measured, but chilling, whether we fear them or ally with them, whether we bury their history or spread it. One truth remains: they will change the galaxy, and nothing we do will prevent it. The chamber broke in quiet murmurs, some lowering their heads in resignation, others whispering of secret preparations, a few already plotting ways to keep humanity at a distance. But none left that hall unchanged, for they all understood now that the Council had no true power over this. Humanity was not a question of policy, it was a force. Back at the academy, the cadets could feel the weight of the Council's debate pressing down even from afar. Their instructors walked with tighter steps. Their lessons grew sharper, and the human among them moved as calmly as ever, his silence heavier than the voices of 100 leaders. He did not need to hear their debate to know what it meant. For wherever humans went, the same questions always followed: do we fear them? Do we fight them? Do we join them? But deep in their hearts, every cadet and every counselor already knew the answer. It did not matter what choice they made. Humanity's path was not theirs to decide, because the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy did not wait for permission. They endured, they survived, and when the time came, they would rise. The session closed without a vote, without a resolution, only silence, silence thick with dread, silence that told the truth no one dared say aloud. The galaxy was not asking whether humanity was dangerous. The galaxy was asking how long it could survive before humanity proved it. The lecture hall was silent when the cadets gathered again, not the usual silence of discipline, but the heavy quiet of fear. They sat straighter than usual, their eyes fixed on the front, their claws, feathers, and scaled fingers twitching nervously. They had seen fleets fall in the records. They had seen humans endure pain and turn wounds into weapons. They had heard whispers of forgotten wars that should have ended humanity yet had only sharpened them. Now they waited for something different, because the teacher had promised them a voice they would never forget. A human would speak to them directly. The door at the side of the hall opened, and the human entered, his steps slow, his presence heavy. He wore no armor, carried no weapon, only a simple uniform that looked worn. The scars visible on his hands and neck said more than any decoration could. He walked to the center of the stage and stood there for a long moment, letting the silence press deeper. The cadets could not look away. His eyes were calm, but there was something inside them, a weight, a shadow, as if he had carried 1,000 battles and still carried them now. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but every word carried. I am not here to frighten you. I am here to tell you the truth. The cadets leaned forward, their hearts pounding. His tone was steady, almost quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout. My people were not born warriors. We were born on a world that tried to kill us every day. Storms that tore apart homes, beasts with teeth longer than our arms, sickness that struck without warning. We did not choose to fight. We were forced to. Every day was war, every sunrise a battle, and every scar a lesson. The cadets shifted uneasily, their eyes wide. The human raised his scarred hand. This is not glory. This is not pride. This is survival. My ancestors bled so we could learn. They died so we could find ways to endure. Our medicines were made by watching our own fall. Our tactics were made by standing against death again and again until death gave up. His eyes swept the hall, steady and piercing. You think we are dangerous because we are strong, but you are wrong. We are dangerous because we refuse to end. The cadets trembled at his words, some gripping the edges of their desks. One whispered to another, "It is true, we saw the records, we saw the scars." The human's voice grew harder. Pain does not stop us. It drives us. Fear does not break us. It sharpens us. When you corner us, we fight harder. When you wound us, we rise again. When you kill us, others take our place. Because survival is not a choice for us, it is what we are. The teacher stood at the side, silent, watching, knowing that no lecture he could give would ever reach them the way this human's words did. The cadets could feel it in their bones, the truth pressing into them. The human continued. Our history is full of wars we should not have survived. Fleets that should have crushed us. Diseases that should have ended us. But here I stand, here my people still stand, and every scar we carry is a warning. If you think death will stop us, you are already lost. The hall was heavy with silence. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. The human's calm words had cut deeper than any shouting commander ever could. He looked across the sea of trembling faces and added quietly, I do not tell you this to boast. I tell you this so you understand. If humanity fights, it is not because we seek it. It is because we have no choice, and when we fight, we do not stop until the very last breath. One cadet, his scales pale, raised his hand with shaking fingers, his voice weak. "Why do you keep fighting, even when everything is lost?" The human turned his gaze on him. His eyes cold but not cruel. "Because nothing is lost until we are gone, and we are never gone." The words struck the hall like thunder. The cadets lowered their heads, unable to meet his eyes, the truth heavier than their training. When the human finished speaking, he stepped back, his silence more powerful than his words. He did not bow, he did not salute, he simply turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the chamber, each step a reminder of the weight he carried. The cadets watched him go, their bodies frozen, their thoughts shaking. When the doors closed behind him, the hall remained quiet, the silence filled with the sound of hearts pounding. One cadet whispered, "He does not fight for victory, he fights because survival itself is war." Another whispered, "And that is why we can never defeat them." The teacher finally broke the silence, his voice low. "You have heard their truth. Now you understand why humanity is feared. Remember it, carry it, never forget it. Because one day you may face them, and if you do, you will not be fighting soldiers. You will be fighting survivors." The cadets nodded slowly, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, because the truth had settled inside them, a truth they would never unlearn. That night the academy was filled with silence, no laughter in the halls, no chatter in the dormitories, only the quiet breathing of cadets lying awake, replaying the humans' words in their minds. Pain does not stop us, fear does not break us, death does not end us. They realized then that humanity's greatest weapon was not their fleets, not their numbers, but the cold truth spoken by a scarred soldier, that survival itself was the reason they had become the galaxy's most dangerous soldiers, and that truth would haunt them forever. The academy hall felt colder the next morning. Though the lights shone the same and the air was the same temperature, something unseen pressed against the walls. The cadets walked in silence, their faces pale and tight, their eyes filled with a fear that had not been there before the human had spoken. The echoes of his words still clung to them like shadows. Pain does not stop us, fear does not break us, death does not end us. Many of them had repeated those words in their minds through the night, unable to sleep, unable to forget. When the teacher entered, he did not speak for a long time, letting the silence stretch until the cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Only then did he begin. "Yesterday you heard his truth. Today I will tell you the reason behind it. The reason humanity became the galaxy's most dangerous soldiers." The screen behind him lit with images of Earth again, storms raging across oceans, lightning tearing through forests, beasts with teeth and claws hunting without mercy, diseases spreading faster than fire. The cadets stared wide-eyed, their throats dry. The teacher spoke, "You have worlds that are safe, calm skies, gentle seasons, predators long gone. But humans live where every day is a battle. Their world forged them, shaped them, scarred them. Survival was never a choice for them. It was the only way to exist." The images shifted to scenes of human history, wars between their own kind, endless battles fought not for conquest of the stars but for survival of tribes, of nations, of families. The cadets shivered, because they had studied wars before, but none so brutal, none so relentless. The teacher continued, "Before they ever reached the stars, they had already fought themselves for thousands of years. They became soldiers not because they wanted to, but because their world demanded it. Their history is carved in blood." One cadet whispered to his neighbor, "They learned war before they learned peace." The neighbor nodded with trembling hands, and they carried it with them to the stars. The teacher's voice grew heavier. "This is the chilling reason. They do not fight to win, they fight to survive, and survival has no end. When you fight to win, you stop once you achieve it. But when you fight to survive, you never stop, you continue until the enemy is gone, until nothing threatens you again. That is why fleets fall, that is why empires tremble. Because humanity does not end wars, they erase them." The cadets lowered their eyes, some unable to meet the images flashing on the wall. One showed a ruined city where human survivors still stood, scarred but alive, raising their flag as smoke covered the sky. Another showed a battlefield littered with machines, but the humans still moved among the wreckage, dragging each other to safety, firing until their last breath. The cadets shook their heads in disbelief. One whispered, "They are not fighting for glory." Another whispered back, "No, they are fighting because they cannot accept death." The teacher let the silence hang again, then spoke in a quieter voice. "The council once believed they could hide this truth. that by locking away the records, by silencing the stories, they could bury the fear. But the fear cannot be buried, because it is not in the records, it is in humanity itself, every scar they wear, every step they take, every word they speak. It all carries the same truth. They are survivors before they are soldiers. And that is what makes them the most dangerous. Soldiers of all. The cadets trembled in their seats. One raised his hand, his voice shaking. Professor, if this is true, if this is who they are, then what chance do we have if they ever turn against us? The teacher looked at him with cold eyes. None, unless you learn from them, unless you accept the same truth they carry. But even then, you will never match them, because they have been forged by fire you cannot imagine. The class ended, but no one rose. They sat frozen, haunted by the weight of what they had learned. Finally, slowly, they left the hall, their voices low, their steps unsteady. In the corridors the whispers began again. But now they were softer, heavier, almost like prayers. One cadet muttered, "The reason they are dangerous is because they do not care about victory." Another replied, "They only care about surviving, and that makes them endless." The words spread like a current, repeated again and again, until the whole academy seemed to carry them. That night the dormitories were quiet. Cadets lay awake staring at the ceilings, their minds filled with visions of humans who should have fallen but did not. Soldiers who should have died but kept moving. Fleets that should have been destroyed but instead destroyed their enemies. The chilling reasons settled into their bones. Survival, nothing more, nothing less, yet nothing more terrifying. Because survival had no finish line, no limit. It continued until all threats were gone. Far beyond the academy walls, the whispers traveled to the council, to the fleets, to the colonies, carried by fearful voices. Humanity had not chosen to be the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. They had been forced into it by their world, by their history, by survival itself, and that truth was not just a lesson, it was a warning that if ever betrayed, if ever cornered, if ever threatened, humanity would not stop. They would endure, they would rise, and they would survive, no matter the cost. And so the cadets of the academy, the future commanders and leaders of alien fleets, carried with them the truth that could never be forgotten. The chilling reason why humanity was feared across the stars, not strength, not size, not power, but survival without end. They became soldiers because they had no choice, and the galaxy trembled because of it.